Hello there, and welcome to Forgotten Worlds. My name is Thomas, and tonight we'll be drifting together into a question that bends at the edges of science, philosophy, and myth. We often imagine time as an arrow shot forward from the past toward the future. It gives us comfort to think that each moment is new, each decision unique, each life unfolding only once. But what if that's not true? What if time is not a straight path, but a circle, a wheel turning endlessly, pulling us back to where we began? In this journey, we'll move slowly, gently, through ideas that stretch from physics to mythology. We'll listen to ancient stories of eternal return, to philosophers who asked if every moment might repeat forever, and to scientists who wonder whether the universe itself loops across infinity. This isn't a lecture, and it isn't a puzzle to be solved. It's an invitation to imagine, to picture yourself within a cosmos where nothing is ever truly lost, and every sunrise has already been seen countless times before. So, as you settle in, let your mind loosen its grip on the present moment. Feel yourself floating in a story older than memory, older than history, older even than the stars. For if time is a loop, then every age, every life, every civilization has walked this road before and will walk it again. When we speak of time, we usually imagine it as a line passed behind us, present beneath our feet, and future stretching ahead into the unknown. This sense of direction is so deeply woven into our lives that we hardly question it. A glass falls, and it shatters. Smoke rises, and it does not return to the flame. We grow older, never younger. The seasons turn, but never in reverse. To us, time feels like an arrow, always moving forward. The roots of this perception lie in physics, specifically in the laws of thermodynamics. The second law tells us that entropy, the measure of disorder, always increases in a closed system. Heat flows from hot to cold, never the other way around. Energy disperses, differences even out, and in the grand unfolding of the universe, order gives way to chaos. This law gives time its apparent direction. A cup of tea cools, it does not spontaneously reheat. A star burns through its fuel until it collapses, never the reverse. From galaxies to grains of sand, this one-way process shapes the rhythm of existence. Entropy is why we age. It's why memories form in one direction, not both. It's why events feel irreversible, why you cannot go back and live yesterday again. In the language of physics, the arrow of time is nothing more than the universe's tendency toward greater disorder. But in human experience, it becomes the deepest framework for meaning. We make choices, knowing they cannot be undone. We treasure moments because they cannot be repeated. We fear endings because we believe they are final. And yet, there is a strangeness here. The laws of physics, at their most fundamental level, do not care about direction. The equations that describe particles and forces are perfectly reversible. They do not distinguish between past and future. Only entropy does, and only at the scale of systems large enough to hold memory, heat, and loss. The arrow of time may not be as absolute as it feels. Still, for us, living in the warmth and friction of the everyday world, entropy is law. It tells us stories must have beginnings, middles, and ends. It tells us civilizations, like stars, must rise, burn, and fade. It tells us that time is a river flowing ever onward, and we are carried with it. But perhaps, if we look closely enough at the current, we may notice eddies, ripples, and loops, places where the arrow falters and the straight line bends. For all its strength, the arrow of time is not the unbreakable law it appears to be. It governs our daily lives with such certainty. Cups shatter but never mend themselves. Smoke disperses but never gathers back into a candle's flame. The body grows older but never younger. And yet, when we step beneath the scale of human experience into the mathematics that underlies the cosmos, something remarkable is revealed. The laws of physics themselves do not insist upon direction. Newton's equations of motion, which describe how objects move under forces, are perfectly reversible. A pendulum swings left, then right. In reverse, the swing is equally valid. Einstein's theory of relativity, which reshaped our understanding of time and space, is indifferent to whether we imagine the cosmos unfolding forward or backward. Even at the most exotic frontiers of science, these laws describe worlds that are symmetrical in both directions. To them, yesterday and tomorrow are mirror images, interchangeable in the equations. It is only when we reach the messy, lived world, the world of heat, friction, and decay, that direction appears. Entropy, that slow swelling of disorder, is the one feature that tips the balance. But entropy itself is an emergent property, something that arises when countless microscopic reversibilities add together into a single, overwhelming flow. From the perspective of a particle, time has no preference. From the perspective of a galaxy, time has a trajectory. The arrow of time, then, may not be a universal truth but a local phenomenon, a feature of scale. This raises profound questions. If the deepest rules of nature do not dictate a forward march, why should we be so certain that time only advances? Could it be that our experience of time's one-way flow is an illusion born from perspective, like watching a great tide and assuming it only rises, never noticing that it will fall again? Some physicists suggest just that time, at its most fundamental, is not linear at all but curved, cyclical, folded in ways we can barely imagine. Quantum mechanics makes the cracks in the arrow even stranger. At this scale, particles do not behave like billiard balls rolling across a table. They are clouds of probability, existing in many states at once, some of which seem to reach backward as easily as forward. In experiments like Wheeler's delayed choice, particles appear to adjust their past behavior based on measurements taken in the present, as though cause and effect had been braided into a single loop. In such cases, time is not an arrow but a Mobius strip, twisting back on itself, without clear beginning or end. What would it mean if the flow of time were not absolute but pliable? It would mean that beginnings and endings are not what we think they are, that the universe itself may not be a line with a birth and a death, but a circle in which every moment returns. Our certainty about progress, about permanence, about endings as final, all of it would dissolve. History, then, might not be a singular tale moving forward, but a melody that repeats across infinite verses. Empires rise, fall, and rise again. Choices echo across cycles. Civilizations play out their destinies, not once, but endlessly. If this vision is true, then the cracks in the arrow are more than curiosities. They are glimpses into a deeper truth, that the straight line we cling to may be only a story, a simplification to make sense of an overwhelming cosmos. Beneath it lies a stranger possibility that time is not a march into the unknown, but a return to the familiar. That what we call past may still exist, and what we call future may already have been. And within this possibility stirs a haunting thought. Perhaps we are not moving forward at all. Perhaps we are circling back, endlessly, into histories we have lived before, into choices we have already made, into civilizations that rise and fall like waves, not once, but forever. Long before physics began to question the nature of time, ancient cultures had already imagined it not as a straight path, but as a wheel. Across continents and centuries, civilizations built their calendars, their rituals, even their understanding of life and death upon the belief that time does not simply move forward, it returns. In India, this vision took shape in the Yugas, immense cosmic ages that rise and fall like the breath of the universe itself. The Satya Yuga, the Golden Age, begins in harmony and purity, when truth is strong and life is in balance. But as the cycle continues, virtue diminishes, shadows lengthen, and humanity drifts into the Kali Yuga, the dark age of disorder, corruption, and decay. Yet this decline is not permanent. When the cycle completes, the golden age returns, and the wheel begins again. Here, history is not linear progress or permanent loss. It is rhythm, a pulse that never stops beating. The Mayans, too, held a vision of cyclical time. Their calendars' intricate, interwoven systems of days, months, and cosmic cycles did not end so much as reset. To them, creation itself had occurred not once, but multiple times. Each world before ours rose, flourished, and was destroyed, only for a new one to be born from its ashes. Floods swept away one age. Fire consumed another. Darkness ended a third. And yet, always, creation returned, repeating the story with different characters, different forms, but the same eternal structure. In the north, the Norse told of Ragnarok, the twilight of the gods. At the end of an age, the world would shudder with earthquakes, seas would surge across the land, and fire would consume the sky. The great serpent Jormungandr would thrash, the wolf Fenrir would break its chains, and even Odin and Thor would fall. Yet this too was not an ending, but a transformation. After Ragnarok, the world would be reborn, fresh and green, rising from the sea to host a new generation of gods and humans. The destruction was terrible, but within it was renewal. Time was not a line toward annihilation, it was a cycle of death and rebirth. These myths, Hindu, Mayan, Norse, and many others, carry the same resonance, that history is not unique, but recursive, that civilizations are not singular, but seasonal, that existence itself may be a loop, repeating endlessly across cosmic scales. They remind us that the fear of endings is perhaps misplaced, for every ending carries within it the seed of beginning. Every collapse makes space for creation. Every silence is followed by song. And so, when we look at these myths together, we glimpse not only humanity's imagination, but perhaps humanity's memory. A memory that whispers, "You have been here before, you will be here again." Time does not march, time returns. If time is indeed a wheel, then myths of eternal return are not merely stories about gods and heroes. They may be reflections of something deeper, the patterns of history itself. Again and again, civilizations have spoken of golden ages, of catastrophic floods, of fires and shadows that destroy worlds, only for life to emerge once more. These stories are striking not only because they appear across cultures, but because they follow the same rhythm: rise, fall, rebirth. Consider the Golden Age myths. In Greek tradition, humanity once lived in harmony with the gods, free from toil and sorrow, until hubris or decline ushered in the Silver and Bronze Ages. Only fragments of that harmony remained, remembered in stories of justice and simplicity. In India's Yuga cycle, the Satya Yuga echoed the same vision, a time of balance and clarity before slow erosion gave way to corruption and loss. These myths do not describe progress toward perfection, but decline into chaos, followed by renewal. The cycle does not end, it resets. Flood stories follow the same arc. In Mesopotamia, the Epic of Gilgamesh recalls Utnapishtim, who survives a deluge sent to wipe clean the human race. In the Bible, Noah builds his ark as the waters rise, carrying forward the seeds of a new beginning. In Mesoamerica, Aztec and Mayan traditions tell of floods that ended one world so another could take its place. The pattern is unmistakable. Destruction is not final, but a necessary prelude to rebirth. The waters erase, but they also prepare. Even destruction by fire carries this cyclical character. In Zoroastrian eschatology, the world ends in flames, yet is purified by them. In Norse Ragnarok, fire consumes the world, but from the ashes a new earth rises, green and fertile. Fire, like water, clears the slate not to annihilate, but to restart the story. When seen together, these myths suggest that humanity has always sensed repetition at the heart of existence. Perhaps this is why they resonate so strongly even today, because they align with something we feel in our bones. The seasons themselves teach us this lesson. Spring follows winter, day follows night, growth follows decay. Why should history, why should time be any different? Speculation takes us one step further. What if these myths are not just metaphors for natural cycles, but fragments of memory from earlier turns of the wheel? What if ancient civilizations preserved in story form faint recollections of events that had happened before not once, but many times? A great flood may not have been only a disaster, but an echo of countless floods across countless cycles. A golden age may not have been an invention, but the remembered glow of ages we have already lived and will live again. In this light, myths are not fantasy, they are survival. They are memory disguised as story, carrying forward whispers of a truth too vast to be spoken plainly. A truth that tells us history is not a ladder reaching upward, but a circle, endlessly returning to itself. Let us bring the question closer, not to empires and ages, but to a single heartbeat. Imagine all of history shrinking until it fits inside your chest. The rooms you have lived in, the afternoons when the light slid across the floorboards, the quarrels, the forgiveness, the nights you could not sleep, the mornings when you almost sang. Imagine that it returns. This is the experiment Friedrich Nietzsche set before the soul and called eternal recurrence. Not a theorem to be proved, not a cosmology to be mapped, but a weight to be lifted or refused. In one of his most disquieting parables, he asks you to picture a visitor, a little demon who comes to your loneliest moment and tells you plainly, "This life, as you now live it and have lived it, you will have to live once more and innumerable times more. There will be nothing new in it, but every pain and every joy, every thought and sigh will return to you in the same succession and sequence. No edits, no skipping, no erasures. The smallest gestures repeat, the bent nail you stepped on in childhood, the taste of the first peach of summer, the exact shape of the cloud you watched dissolving over the station, all of it returning, always." Nietzsche called this thought the heaviest weight. He knew what it demanded. It is easy to nod at cycles when we speak of seasons and stars. It is harder to accept the unerasable return of the moments we would rather forget. That embarrassing sentence we should not have spoken, that good intention carried out too late, that door we shut and can no longer reopen. Eternal recurrence presses these against the sternum and whispers, "Are you willing to live them again?" Yet the weight doubles back and becomes something else, because if the failures return, so do the radiances. The first person who looked at you and truly saw you, the walk you took under the tamarind or the poplar or the jacaranda when the air was clean and your mind unclenched, the book you opened by chance and felt as if you were being written by it, a child's sleepy hand finding yours in a crowd, the kitchen warm with cinnamon and water boiling. These too are forever. If the wheel turns, it turns them with it. Nietzsche is not asking for superstition, he is asking for evaluation. The demon's message is a mirror that doesn't blur. If the prospect horrifies you, if the idea of your life returning unchanged forever feels like a punishment, then the thought reveals something sharp about how you are living now. If it exalts you, if the idea strikes you as privilege, grace, challenge, then it reveals something else, that you are arranging your days into a shape you could love again. This is why the thought is weighty. It turns the ordinary into a test. The way you tie your shoe, the way you answer the phone, the way you speak to those who cannot help you, the waste you leave behind. The kindnesses you extend without needing to be thanked. Every small act becomes eternal in this experiment. The point is not whether the universe actually repeats in the strict physical sense. The point is to see what happens to your standards when you imagine that it does. Many moral systems preach from the outside in, handing down laws. Nietzsche's thought does something stranger. It internalizes the verdict. Would you endorse this moment if it were to be stamped on eternity? There is a second edge to the mirror. Eternal recurrence dismantles the soft excuses we make with the idea of a one-way future. I will become generous later. I will stop harming myself after the busy season. I will be brave when the world is calmer. In a world that returns, postponement itself returns. Procrastination becomes not a delay but a destiny. The thought breaks that spell. If later is always this again, then the only place to alter the circle is now here, in the next sentence, the next breath. Consider how this reshapes regret. Many philosophies treat regret as a stain to be scrubbed out. Nietzsche's experiment invites us to transmute it. If the scene returns, rewrite your presence inside it. You cannot delete the memory, but you can prepare for its recurrence by becoming the kind of person who would meet it differently, more lucid, more generous, more steady. Eternal recurrence thus becomes a technology of character, a way to draft yourself toward a standard you choose, not by fear of punishment but by appetite for affirmation. This is not a denial of pain. The thought is clearest when you set it against suffering that cannot be neatly redeemed, bereavement, illness, the accident that changed the map of everything. Eternal recurrence is not the insult that says it is all for the best. It says something subtler and more difficult. Can you consent to reality? Not because it is always kind, but because it is real. Can you answer yes to the whole of it, to the ugliness alongside the beauty, not with resignation, but with a vow to shape what can still be shaped? This vow is what Nietzsche folds into a related phrase, amor fati, the love of one's fate. Not the passive acceptance of whatever happens, but the active art of finding a stance from which you could will your life again. See how this alters your posture. You are no longer person plus circumstances, pleading for a different past. You are author and material at once, revising your responses rather than your history. The wheel shows you what you cannot change and what you can, the next word, the next courtesy, the next refusal to do harm. In the quiet of a night like this, the kind of night where the city's electricity softens to a calm murmur, you can try the experiment without theatrics. Take a single day you have just lived, not the highlight reel, the entire spool. The moments you were bored and reached for distraction, the task you completed a little better than you had to, the sentence you rushed and wish you had made gentler. Now say to yourself, this day returns. Not with dread, not with smugness, but with clarity. What, then, must be kept? What must be changed? That is the practical engine of the thought. It does not sit on a shelf. It pulls you toward edits made in conduct. There is a temptation to mistake all this for determinism. If everything repeats, nothing is free, but that flattens the nuance. Nietzsche's wheel is not a jail precisely because the point of the exercise is not to tell you that your choices are illusions. It is to raise the stakes of your choices by imagining their permanence. Freedom becomes less about novelty and more about fidelity. Are you willing to own the life you are building, not only once, but always? Notice how the thought heals a modern ache, the fear of meaninglessness. If time stretches forward only into dissolution, it is easy to feel that nothing matters finally. Eternal recurrence inverts the horizon. If every moment is, in some sense, forever, if your gestures recur, then meaning is not a rare mineral hidden in the future. It is present wherever you place it, and it stays. The cup you wash kindly becomes an artifact of eternity in the experiment. The apology you finally make is no longer just a local repair, but a template laid into the circle. And yes, the thought also sharpens joy. In a linear frame, we often panic at happiness as it fades, grasping, hoarding, fearing the end. In a recurrent frame, you can let joy be itself. It returns. The taste of rain after heat, the low laugh of a friend who understands the joke before you finish it, the first page of a book that speaks in your voice. The day your body felt fully your own. You do not have to clutch. You can participate, then release, then trust that the wheel is kind enough to bring the shape back around. Eternal recurrence also reframes ambition. Many ambitions feed on comparison and scarcity, on the fantasy that triumphs must be singular or they are not triumphs. The wheel refutes that panic. It suggests a different metric: build what you would want to welcome again. This moves emphasis from theatrics to craft. A quiet excellence suddenly counts for more than loud success. The chef who learns the timing of a flame, the nurse whose hands know how to calm, the teacher who writes one sentence so clearly a student can carry it for years. Each of these becomes a craftsperson of recurrence, setting standards they would gladly repeat. Does the idea risk sanctifying injustice by saying, "It returns, accept it"? Only if we misunderstand acceptance. Nietzsche's yes is not complicity, it is lucidity plus agency. To love fate is not to love oppression, it is to refuse to pretend the world is other than it is, so that your interventions can actually work. In recurrent time, harm also returns unless countered. Thus the experiment heightens responsibility. Whatever injustice you tolerate becomes a pattern. Whatever justice you practice becomes one, too. The wheel is ethical pressure. There is a tenderness hidden in the thought, one that suits a documentary meant to ease the mind toward rest. If what you do with attention recurs, then attention itself becomes a sacred tool. The way you notice a street tree in the dark, the way its leaves keep their own small weather. The way a cat crosses the road with a confidence it has not quite earned. The way your breath thickens and then smooths. This noticing is not wasted. It is a vote for a world that returns with more of the real in it. Attention is how you lengthen the moments worth living again. And there is a discipline that fits the bedside as well as the battlefield. Micro-affirmations. Say yes, not in slogans but in small, repeated shapes. Leave the room a little kinder than you found it. Learn one deftness you can give away without fanfare. Protect one patch of what cannot replace itself. Speak to yourself in a voice you would be glad to hear forever. Eternal recurrence fed by such practices ceases to be terrifying and becomes quietly beautiful. Even the language of the body receives a gentler gloss when held inside this circle. If rest returns, you can rest without guilt. If fatigue returns, you can meet it without contempt. If grief returns because it does, you can plan tenderness around it the way architects plan for wind. This is not romance. It is design. How do I build a life that can be lived again without cruelty to the one who must live it? At the edge of thought, Nietzsche leaves us with a paradox that feels like music resolving. The more you imagine eternal recurrence, the more present you become. The future stops being a glittering fantasy or a nightmare of extinction. It becomes the echo of the way you carry yourself now. The past stops being a museum of injuries. It becomes the pattern that invites you to refine your line. In this way, the doctrine dissolves abstraction. It brings you back to the weight of a hand on a doorknob, the decision to listen another 5 seconds, the courage to end a harm today and not next year. And when the mind is ready to float again from the room back to the cosmos, the thought does not collapse. It widens. If a single life can be judged by whether you would will it again, a culture can be judged the same way. What institutions would you repeat forever? What habits of a people would you bless to return? Which monuments deserve the wheel and which do not? Suddenly the grand questions are not alien. They are scaled-up versions of the nightly question you ask yourself in low light. Would I live this day again? In that continuity, the personal and the civilizational shake hands. Out beyond the lamplight, other disciplines will enter the conversation. Mathematics whispering about recurrence theorems, cosmology sketching universes that loop, physics testing whether systems under certain conditions must eventually revisit prior states. But those are the next rooms on tonight's walk. For now, let the simple, difficult invitation do its quiet work. Arrange a life that you can say yes to, not because it is flawless, but because you have met it with enough courage and care that its return would feel like recognition rather than sentence. In the hush where the city's noise subsides and the body begins to loosen its grip on the day, this is a soft vow one can make without drama. To become a companion you would gladly meet again whenever the circle closes and opens once more. In the quiet halls of mathematics, there is a theorem that seems at once abstract and deeply unsettling. It is called the Poincaré recurrence theorem, and though it is a child of equations and probability, it whispers of something eerily familiar, the idea that, given enough time, everything that can happen will happen again. The theorem begins with a simple assumption. Imagine a closed system, finite in energy, finite in volume. Nothing enters, nothing leaves. Within such a system, the possible arrangements of particles, though vast, are limited. And if you let that system evolve long enough, unimaginably long, it must, with certainty, revisit states it has already known, not once, not twice, but endlessly. Over eons that dwarf comprehension, every arrangement of matter returns, every configuration of atoms reappears, every pattern of motion loops back upon itself. Translated into the language of the cosmos, this means that recurrence is not only possible, it is inevitable. Stars may burn out, galaxies may scatter, but if the universe is finite and bound, then eventually it must fold back into familiar shapes. The molecules that make your breath, your hand, your heart, all of them, may one day align again, precisely as they are now, repeating the life you know in every detail. Pause with that for a moment. Imagine yourself not as a traveler moving forward along an arrow, but as a passenger on a great wheel, circling across eternity. Every choice you've made, every word you've spoken, every sunrise you've seen, not lost, not past, but waiting ahead of you, to be lived again. It is not memory, it is not prophecy, it is recurrence, built into the fabric of mathematics itself. Of course, physicists remind us that the timescales required are staggering. The recurrence of even a small system may take longer than the current age of the universe by powers of 10 that defy imagination. And yet, probability does not care for comfort. However long it takes, the theorem insists, the wheel will turn, the system will repeat. And so, in a quiet way, modern physics begins to echo the myths and philosophies of old. The Hindu yugas, the Mayan cycles, the eternal return of Nietzsche all find a strange mirror in the chalkboards of mathematicians. Not through metaphor, but through calculation. The cosmos itself seems to suggest that history, like matter, cannot escape recurrence. But here is where speculation stirs. What if this recurrence is not only mathematical but historical? What if civilizations themselves are bound to repeat, not metaphorically, but literally, Rome rising, Rome falling, Atlantis drowned, Atlantis reborn endlessly across the spans of cosmic recurrence? What if déjà vu, myth, prophecy are not just cultural curiosities but faint ripples of recognition? The psyche, remembering what the cosmos has already rehearsed. Imagine walking through your day tomorrow, drinking tea, watching clouds, speaking to someone you love, and knowing that this moment is not the first time, nor the last, that it has been lived before countless times and will be lived again. Would it weigh on you, this knowledge, or would it lighten you? Would it make your choices feel meaningless or infinitely meaningful? In the mathematics of recurrence, everything returns. The universe itself may be a great looping song played on repeat across eternity. And within that song, every civilization, every life is a verse already sung, already waiting to be sung again. When mathematics speaks, it often does so with the cold clarity of numbers. And yet sometimes, within that clarity, we find ideas that carry the warmth and strangeness of myth. The Poincaré recurrence theorem is one of these ideas. At first glance, it is a simple statement about probabilities. But when unfolded, it becomes a vision of eternity, not as a blank void, but as a pattern that insists on returning. The theorem proposes that in a closed system, one with finite energy, Confined within finite space, the number of possible states is not infinite. It may be unimaginably vast, but it is countable. And so, if the system evolves long enough, each state must recur. A planet, a star, a particle, even the arrangement of dust on a windowsill, given enough time, it will return to precisely the form it once held. And not just once, but again and again, endlessly, across the span of cosmic time. Here, the imagination stirs. If the universe is such a system, then every life, every civilization, every thought has already happened before. It is happening now. It will happen again. The laughter of a child, the building of a pyramid, the quiet glance across a crowded room, all of it is preserved in the wheel of recurrence, destined to play itself out an infinite number of times. Physicists temper this vision with reminders of scale. The time required for even the simplest system to return is so immense it dwarfs the age of the cosmos. For the full universe, the timescales exceed comprehension, numbers so large they erase themselves into silence. But inevitability does not care for scale. It whispers instead. However long it takes, recurrence is certain. And so we find ourselves face to face with a strange echo of myth and philosophy. The Hindu yugas spoke of golden ages returning. The Mayan calendar measured cycles of creation and destruction. Nietzsche imagined the soul living its moments endlessly. And here, in the austere language of mathematics, the same truth emerges, that what has been will be again, not by story or speculation, but by probability itself. From this vantage, history ceases to be unique. It becomes a sequence replayed across eternity. The fall of empires, the discovery of fire, the writing of the first poem, the launch of the first satellite, each a note in a melody destined to repeat. Our world, our lives, are not singular compositions, but refrains sung across infinite time. Speculation takes this one step further. If recurrence is a law of probability, then perhaps history itself is bound to loop. Perhaps our wars and our reconciliations, our discoveries and our losses are not accidents but inevitabilities, rehearsed in cycle after cycle. The question then becomes not whether we repeat, but how we live, knowing that we do. Do we despair, thinking nothing can change? Or do we take comfort, knowing that nothing is ever truly lost, that every moment returns, that every beauty is eternal, because it will always come again? In this light, modern physics does not stand apart from myth. It joins it. It tells us that recurrence is not only a story told by ancient poets or philosophers in shadowed rooms, but a pattern inscribed in the probabilities of the universe itself. And in that pattern, we find ourselves not as travelers on a line toward an ending, but as voices in a chorus that never stops singing. If physics and philosophy suggest that time may bend back upon itself, it is no wonder that our stories echo the same fascination. Science fiction, perhaps more than any other genre, has given us vivid portraits of what it means to live inside a loop. In these tales, time ceases to be a one-way river and becomes a circle, trapping or liberating those who wander within it. Take Groundhog Day. At first glance, it is a light comedy, but beneath the humor lies one of the most profound meditations on recurrence ever placed on screen. The main character, Phil Connors, wakes up every morning to find himself reliving the same day. No matter what he does, whether he embraces kindness or cruelty, whether he tries to escape or surrender, the loop holds. What begins as torment becomes, over time, a path toward transformation. The message is clear. In a looping world, repetition can become the teacher that no straight line ever provides. Other films take the same motif into darker, more speculative realms. Edge of Tomorrow imagines soldiers trapped in a war where death is never final. Every battle fought again, every mistake revisited, until strategy and resilience finally win. Dark, the German series, folds time into knots, generations bound together in cycles of repetition, where cause and effect dissolve into paradox. In each case, the loop is both prison and possibility, stripping characters of illusions of progress but offering them the chance to master themselves in ways linear time does not allow. Why do these stories hold such power over us? Perhaps because they mirror our own secret sense that life already contains its loops. The routines we fall into, the mistakes we make again and again, the habits we cannot escape. To live inside a time loop on screen is only an exaggeration of what it feels like to live inside the loops of human behavior. And in that exaggeration, the story shows us a truth, that repetition can either imprison us or awaken us. Science fiction also gives us the chance to explore the emotional textures of looping time. What does it feel like to fall in love in a loop, to lose someone in a loop, to carry memory when no one else does? These questions are not simply narrative hooks. They are philosophical experiments played out in costume and dialogue, testing what it means to be human in a cosmos where nothing is final, where everything may be lived again. Speculatively, one might even wonder if these stories are more than fiction. What if our obsession with time loops reflects not only imagination, but recognition? What if we write these stories because somewhere, deep in memory or myth, we know the loop is real? That déjà vu, prophecy, or the pull of ritual are faint reminders that we have been here before and will be again. Science fiction, then, becomes not only entertainment, but foreshadowing a way of glimpsing truths our sciences and philosophies are only beginning to articulate. In its dreamlike portraits of endless repetition, it prepares us for the possibility that time itself is not a line but a circle, and that our lives, our choices, our civilizations may be played again and again, like stories retold by the universe itself. What if the stories we tell are not merely inventions of the imagination, but subtle recollections, echoes of truths our conscious minds have forgotten, yet which return through myth and art? Fiction often works this way, carrying the intuition of a culture before science has the words to explain it. The myths of flight predated airplanes, tales of mechanical beings predated robotics, dreams of traveling beyond the stars predated rocketry. Perhaps time loops in fiction are no different, not just fantasies, but foreshadowings of realities waiting in the folds of the cosmos. Across cultures, stories of repetition appear again and again. Folktales speak of cursed figures doomed to relive the same day. Legends recall heroes who return in different ages, fighting the same battles across generations. Modern science fiction amplifies these motifs with cinematic clarity, but their bones are ancient. The recurrence of such narratives suggests they may be archetypal, arising not from coincidence, but from something deep within human memory, or deeper still, from the very structure of reality. Consider déjà vu, that uncanny sensation of having lived a moment before. Neuroscience calls it a misfiring of memory, but stories often transform it into evidence of cycles, proof that the present is not entirely new. When we write fictions about looping time, are we dramatizing the same intuition? Are we trying, through narrative, to grapple with an instinct that time is not linear, that events do not vanish but recur? Fiction's gift is that it lets us explore these intuitions without demanding proof. In a story, we can imagine what it means to relive, to remember futures, to collapse cause and effect into a single knot. And in doing so, we may be preparing ourselves for a reality. Science has only begun to uncover a reality where recurrence is not metaphor, but law. Speculatively, this would mean that art is not only reflection but prophecy. When cultures return to themes of rebirth, cycles, and endless return, they may be expressing more than longing. They may be attuning to the patterns of the universe itself. Just as a dream can sometimes reveal what waking thought refuses to acknowledge, stories may reveal truths we cannot yet prove but somehow already know. In this way, fiction becomes rehearsal. Each time we tell a story of looping time, we practice living in such a world. We test our resilience, our fears, our capacity for meaning when progress is no longer guaranteed. And perhaps when or if we finally discover that time truly bends back on itself, we will not be unprepared. We will have already told the story. We will already know the shape of the loop. If fiction offers rehearsal, cosmology offers a stage grand enough to hold the loop entire. For beyond myth and metaphor, scientists have long wondered whether the universe itself may not be a straight line, but a circle, a cosmos that begins not once but endlessly, in a rhythm of expansion and collapse. At the heart of this vision is the idea of the closed universe. Imagine the Big Bang not as a singular beginning, but as one note in an eternal song. The universe bursts outward, galaxies racing apart, stars igniting, worlds forming. But gravity, quiet and patient, never lets go. Over billions of years, expansion slows. The galaxies halt their retreat, and then, like a breath reversing, the universe begins to contract. Stars fall inward, galaxies draw closer. Heat rises until all matter collapses back into a singularity, the Big Crunch. And from that singularity, perhaps, comes another explosion, another Big Bang, another unfolding of stars and lives and civilizations. If this model is true, then we do not live in the first universe, nor will we live in the last. We exist in one cycle of a cosmic heartbeat, preceded by countless others, to be followed by countless more. Every law of physics, every atom of matter, every flare of consciousness may be part of a rhythm so vast we cannot hear its beginning or its end. The beauty and the terror of this idea is its symmetry. The same forces that birth the cosmos also ensure its return. Creation and destruction are not opposites, but phases of a single process. Expansion is the inhale, collapse is the exhale. The universe breathes. Speculation deepens the vision. If each cycle begins again from a singularity, does it repeat exactly? Are we fated to live the same histories, to rebuild the same civilizations, to speak the same words across eternity? Or does each cycle branch into something slightly different, the wheel turning but never in quite the same groove? Are we living a repeat performance or an endless improvisation? For many cultures, this idea would not be surprising. Hindu cosmology already imagines universes born and destroyed in cycles, each lasting billions of years. The Maya spoke of worlds created and remade. Even the Norse saw Ragnarok not as an ending, but as a reset. Modern cosmology, in its equations of closed universes, seems to be arriving at a vision long held by myth, that creation is never singular, but cyclical. And so, when we look up at the night sky, we may not be seeing the one true universe, but one verse in an infinite chorus, a cosmos destined to collapse and to rise again. Our history, our lives, our very thoughts may already be part of a script played countless times before, and destined to be played countless times again, written not by us, but by the universe itself. If the vision of a closed universe offers us a cycle of expansion and collapse, the Big Bounce takes the idea one step further. It suggests that the end is never final, and that each collapse does not return to nothingness, but instead ignites a new beginning, a fresh universe unfolding from the ashes of the old. In quantum cosmology, singularities, those infinitely dense points where physics seems to break down, may not be the impassable walls we once imagined. Instead, they may act as thresholds. When the universe contracts into a big crunch, quantum effects could prevent the collapse from ending in oblivion. Instead, space-time itself rebounds, like a ball striking the ground and leaping upward. The result: another Big Bang, another expansion, another universe. But here is where speculation sharpens the picture. If the universe rebounds, what exactly is preserved? Do the laws of physics reset each time, or do they carry over intact? If constants like gravity or the speed of light shift even slightly from one bounce to the next, then each universe may be familiar yet subtly different, an infinite series of variations on the same theme. One cycle might allow galaxies to form earlier, another might favor different kinds of stars, another might never produce life at all. And perhaps, in this endless chain, some universes resemble ours so closely that entire civilizations, even individual lives, recur in near-perfect detail. This is where the imagination catches fire. If every bounce spawns a new but almost identical cosmos, then we may not be the first to live these moments. Somewhere in the deep past of previous cycles, a version of you sat just as you are now, listening to these words. And in the distant future of cycles yet to come, another version will do the same, unaware that it is part of an eternal rhythm. History may not only repeat, it may reverberate, each cycle a chord in an infinite progression. The Big Bounce hypothesis, then, is not only a scientific model but also a profound philosophical mirror. It suggests that nothing is ever truly lost. Civilizations may collapse, species may vanish, even universes may fall into silence, but always, from that silence, something rises. Creation is not a singular miracle, but an endless process, a pulse that carries the cosmos through birth, death, and rebirth forever. This echoes the intuitions of myth with uncanny precision. The Hindu vision of universes created and destroyed, the phoenix rising from its ashes. The Mayan cycles of world-making all seem to anticipate what quantum cosmology now entertains, that existence itself is a rhythm, a series of beginnings nested inside endings. And so, if we live within one of these cycles, we are not only creatures of a single age, we are participants in an infinite return, heirs of countless universes before us, precursors to countless universes yet to come. Our story is not isolated, it is one note in an eternal bouncing song carried across the cosmos by the strange mercy of recurrence. If the cosmos itself may breathe in loops, then perhaps it is no coincidence that human history seems to carry the same rhythm. Across ages and continents, the record of civilization does not resemble a straight ladder climbing ever upward, but a pattern of rise and fall, collapse and renewal. Empires flourish, empires fade, dynasties consolidate, weaken, and dissolve. Economies boom, collapse, and rebuild. To look at history closely is to see not progress in a single direction, but a sequence of arcs repeating across time. Take Rome, the empire so often invoked as the measure of greatness. It began as a small city-state, expanded into a republic, then transformed into a mighty empire stretching across continents. For centuries, it dominated trade, warfare, art, and politics, but the same forces that built Rome also undermined it. Overexpansion strained resources, corruption weakened institutions, internal divisions and external pressures chipped away at stability. Eventually, the empire fractured, its western half dissolving into what later generations called the Dark Ages. Yet Rome's story did not vanish. Its laws, its roads, its architecture, its language all survived, carried into the next cycle of European history. Rome fell, and Rome endured. Both were true. The same cyclical rhythm appears in China, where historians themselves developed the idea of the dynastic cycle. A ruling family would seize power, unify the state, and usher in an era of stability and prosperity. Over time, wealth concentrated, corruption spread, natural disasters and unrest were interpreted as signs that the dynasty had lost the mandate of heaven. Rebellion followed, a new family claimed power, and the cycle began again. To Chinese chroniclers, this was not a tragedy but a pattern, an acknowledgement that history was less a straight line than a wheel turning through the centuries. Even our modern world, with its belief in progress and growth, has not escaped the rhythm. Economies boom, driven by innovation and confidence, only to collapse in busts that sweep away fortunes and reset the stage. The Great Depression of the 1930s, the financial crises of the late 20th and early 21st centuries, each reminds us that wealth and growth are not permanent but cyclical, part of a repeating arc that societies must navigate again and again. This recurrence has led some historians and philosophers to argue that time itself imprints patterns on human life. Oswald Spengler, in The Decline of the West, imagined civilizations as organisms, each with a lifespan of growth, maturity, and decay. Arnold Toynbee spoke of challenge and response, cycles of rise and fall triggered by how societies met crises. Even modern thinkers in sociology and economics trace repeating arcs, noting that human behavior, bound by psychology and environment, tends to reproduce familiar outcomes across generations. Speculatively, one might ask, are these patterns merely human tendencies, or are they echoes of something deeper? If the universe itself loops, if probability demands recurrence, then perhaps history follows the same law. Rome falls because empires must fall. Dynasties collapse because power must circulate. Economies boom and bust because cycles are not accidents, they are the structure of time itself. In this light, we are not only students of history but participants in a rhythm older than memory. We rise, we fall, we rise again. Our civilizations are not unique lines marching forward, but variations on a theme played across centuries. Each repetition shaped by new instruments but conducted by the same unseen rhythm. Set the lights low in your mind and let the noise recede. What remains is a slow, tidal rhythm. People gather, build, flourish, overreach, falter, disperse, and gather again. It is tempting to say that we repeat because we forget, or because we are stubborn. But there is another possibility, quieter and more unsettling, that repetition is not only a habit of humans, but a habit of time itself. That history's arcs recur because the corridor through which events can walk narrows to the same doorways each age, as if the floor plan were drawn before the visitors arrived. Think of the world as a landscape with valleys and ridges. In physics, a system placed on such a landscape tends to slide into a tractor's stable shapes it will keep returning to, even after it's knocked about. Civilizations may live on a similar terrain. Push them with new inventions, new faiths, new climates, and they surge. Starve them with drought, fracture them with inequality, and they stall. But again and again, they settle into familiar basins of behavior: consolidation, expansion, overreach, correction. The names change: Akkad, Han, Abbasid, Songhai, Habsburg, Ottoman, British, American, but the contours rhyme. The basin holds. From a distance, this looks like predestination. Up close, it is a network of pressures that nudge the future down the same grooves. Populations grow, fields and fisheries strain, prices climb, debts swell, elites multiply faster than top offices can absorb, trust thins. Institutions creak. The responses are likewise recurrent: reform, repression, redistribution, revolt. The order varies, the costumes differ, but the sequence comes around like seasons. The mandate of heaven in China described this as a moral weather. Virtue gathers rain, corruption calls drought. When rulers fail the people, heaven withdraws its favor, and the storm of replacement breaks. You could also call it a structural cycle. Feedbacks mount until any small spark finds tinder waiting. There are gentler patterns, too, rhythms of culture and mood that wax and wane. Periods of exuberant building give way to seasons of refinement. Experimental art softens into classical form, then restlessness returns, pushing forms to fracture and bloom again. Economies surge with innovation, then spend years digesting what they made. Labor gains power, then capital, then labor again. Generations repeat postures. One cohort sets rules, the next rebels, the next negotiates, the next forgets why the rules were made and rediscovers the taste for risk. None of this needs conspiracy. It is simply how personalities, demography, and incentives braid. If time loops, these tendencies bite deeper. Each turn of the wheel would not only recreate broad conditions, it would also tighten probability, making certain outcomes overwhelmingly likely. When energy is cheap and plentiful, polities centralize and sprawl. When energy grows expensive, they decentralize, conserve, and localize. When communication accelerates, the public sphere expands, then shatters under its own noise, then reconstitutes around new filters. When climate swings, food follows, and politics follows food. In cyclical time, such responses aren't improvisations. They are refrains waiting for the band to reach that bar of the song. Imagine 3 rooms arranged across centuries, lit by the same moon. In the first, a Roman scribe copies a decree arguing for bread and games to calm a city that has grown too large for its aqueducts. In the second, a Ming official writes a memorial about granaries and river works, pleading for maintenance before flood season. In the third, a modern analyst drafts a policy brief about decaying infrastructure and brittle supply chains. The instruments change stylus, brush, keyboard, but the melody is recognizable. Predestination here doesn't mean the exact decree, the exact memorial, the exact brief. It means the necessity of such papers, written whenever a society outruns the maintenance of its own complexity. There is also the sine wave of elites, not villainy by default, but a demographic fact. In stable times, privilege tends to beget more candidates for privilege, more educated, ambitious people competing for a finite pool of status, office, and meaning. As that pool overfills, frustration grows. Rival factions pull institutions taut. A spark, scandal, crisis, drought snaps the rope. Then comes pruning, exits, reforms, replacement. Over and over, empires don't die simply of invasion. They tilt under the weight of too many hands on the tiller. Debt follows cycles just as faithfully. Booms invite leverage. Leverage magnifies success until it magnifies risk. A surprise arrives, harvest misses, contagion spreads. War spooks markets, and the cascade begins. Balance sheets shrink, credit tightens, projects stall, employment shrinks, politics hardens. After the purge, thrift and caution rule, then memory fades and appetite returns. In a looping cosmos, you can almost set the metronome: credit, exuberance, fragility, correction, repair, repeat. So is history a script we are doomed to recite? The metaphor is close but not exact. It is less a finished script than a score key signatures and tempos that strongly suggest how the piece will be played. Within that score, performers can linger, accelerate, soften, or crescendo. A polity can cushion a downturn or sharpen it. It can broaden the circle of care or barricade it. It can share the costs of contraction widely or stack them on the already burdened. Predestination, in this sense, shapes the stage directions where the players stand, when the props enter, how long the scene runs but leaves tone, emphasis, and mercy to the cast. Mercy matters. If winter must come, and in cyclical time it must, societies still choose how to winter. There are hard winters and there are stored winters, granaries filled quietly, floodplains kept free for the river to breathe, guilds and unions and cooperatives that knit neighborhoods into nets that can catch falling people. There are soft landings engineered by dull, far-sighted work, maintenance budgets passed when glamour beckoned elsewhere. Small failures allowed early so bigger failures don't erupt late. To imagine time as a loop is not to surrender, it is to rehearse the care that turns a crash into a bend. What, then, forces the recurrence so reliably? Part of the answer is energy. Civilizations are machines for channeling energy into order, calories into labor, wood and coal, and oil into motion, sunlight into harvest, attention into coordination. As sources rise and fall in quality and accessibility, the feasible size and complexity of polities shifts with them. Another part is information, how fast it travels, how it fractures communities or knits them. Another is ecology, soils that tire if they are never allowed to rest, waters that silt if floodplains are paved, fisheries that taper if spawning grounds are trawled. Systems nudge back. Ignore their tempos and they loosen your grip. Learn their tempos and they lend you strength. Culture is a timing device too. Founding myths begin expansive, generous, universal, open-handed, and then, as wealth concentrates, the myth narrows into justification, then into theatre. Reformers try to widen it again. Sometimes they succeed. Sometimes they are absorbed as decoration for the very order they wish to change. This, too, returns. You can watch the arc in inscriptions and slogans, from for all to for us to for me, then, after a shock, back to for all again. Time's groove catches even language. None of this requires that every detail recur. A world with telegraphs is not a world with tablets. A world with algorithms is not a world with scribes. But constraints and trade-offs bend the new into shapes the old would recognize. Communication speed can compress decision cycles until politics runs hot. That demands new cooling systems, deliberation spaces with friction built in. Cheap energy tempts breadth over depth. That demands later repairs when the bill for breadth comes due. Globalization creates incomparable exchanges. It also creates synchronized fragility, so that a cough in one port becomes fever in another. Each novelty breeds its counter-novelty, and the pair dances a familiar step. If you listen carefully, you can hear micro-histories humming along the macro tune. A city district gentrifies, then prices out the workers who keep it alive, then wonders why it feels sterile, then tries to lure back the very people it displaced. A school district buoys one cohort with resources, then starves the next in a tax revolt, then spends decades clawing back capacity. A company expands past the competence of its culture, then brings in rules and auditors, then sheds agility, then gets outpaced by smaller rivals. These are not just stories of error, they are loops of adaptation that overshoot and correct, forever. To call this predestination is not to deny agency, it is to locate it. Agency lives in the way we meet the loop. Think of three stances. Denial, insisting the curve is a line, that growth knows no bounds, that risk is for other people, other times. This stance burns hot and ends cold. Resignation, shrugging that nothing can change, letting cycles swing to their extremes, mistaking fatalism for wisdom. This stance keeps hands clean and hearts empty. Composure, acknowledging the pattern, building buffers, honoring maintenance, distributing risk, and practicing restraint when restraint has gone out of fashion. This stance neither panics nor sleeps, it tends. Composure is not dramatic, and so it is seldom celebrated in the moment. But in a looping world, it quietly compounds. Fewer brittle links, more redundancies, less needless harm when the tide turns. Composure is predestination's antidote to cruelty. There is also the matter of memory. Linear cultures try to outrun the past. Cyclical cultures try to remember it. Where memory is formalized, seasonal festivals that encode planting schedules, oaths that refresh civic norms, apprenticeships that carry tacit skills, societies bleed less when the wheel hits the same stones. Where memory is mocked as quaint, the same lessons are repurchased at higher prices. It is not antiquarian to keep old tools of thought, it is prudent. A ledger kept on paper in a fireproof box, a hand pump well that works when the power is gone, a story that teaches the children where the floodwater always comes. These are not antiques, they are anchors cast into the future. If time requires certain scenes, concentration and dispersal, empire and commons, feast and famine, it does not require that each return be cruel. A famine can be a shortage managed with dignity rather than a catastrophe flavored with blame. A dispersal can be planned retreat rather than rout. A reform can be timely rather than desperate. Predestination does not force tone, tone is ours. There is a tenderness even in the grim parts when viewed from a sleep-soft distance. You can see the generations handing one another the same puzzles and watch, with a kind patience, as they try again. One century tries enclosure, another tries emancipation. One era experiments with hierarchy, another with federation. One cycle learns to treat rivers as machines, another remembers to treat them as living calendars. The repetitions are not meaningless because they are repetitions. They are practice. The world is trying to learn itself. If the cosmos loops, perhaps the point is not to escape the circle but to round it, smooth the rough edges so the turning harms less. That work happens where history looks smallest, at the thresholds where policy becomes experience, where budgets become shelters, where stories become habit. A culture can choose to load its cycles with kindness, wildfire buffers cut before the spark, floodplains left free. Clinics staffed year-round because outbreaks don't schedule themselves, teachers paid steadily so children see the same faces. Libraries open late because memory needs places to sit. Each choice is local, almost invisible. In aggregate, they change how hard the wheel bites. And if time insists on certain climaxes, crises that test what we have built, then perhaps the moral art of predestination is to stage mercy in advance. Stockpiles not only of grain and medicine, but of trust. Cross-partisan civic rituals that survive leadership changes. Rules for how to share during shortages that were written in peace when they could be generous. Mutual aid rehearsed when it is easy, so it exists when it is hard. These are not heroics. They are choreography for the scene that always arrives. Take one more slow breath and let the idea settle. History may indeed be bound to revisit its shapes, because the constraints that carve those shapes, energy, ecology, information, demography, attention, are perennial. The loop is real, but within the loop, rooms open. In them, predestination feels less like a sentence and more like a score we learn to play with grace. The crescendos will still come, the rests will still follow, yet a steadier hand on the bow changes everything the listener remembers. So we carry two truths at once. First, that events will return, growth and glut, pride and fall, hunger and harvest, centralizing and loosening, the drum of reform, the hush of reflection. Second, that meaning lives in how we receive them, in earlier warnings heeded, in lives cushioned instead of shattered, in rivers allowed to breathe, in schools that do not close when fashion changes, in the refusal to make enemies of neighbors simply because the wheel has turned them onto the other side of a debate. If time's geometry does indeed funnel us toward familiar gates, then wisdom is not the fantasy of new gates, but the craftsmanship of better thresholds, wider, kinder, less steep to climb. The door will open where it always does. We can still decide what the room beyond will feel like when we and those who come after step through. There is a particular strangeness that almost everyone has felt, often in the quietest of moments. You walk into a room, hear a fragment of a sentence, or glance at a turning shadow on the wall, and suddenly you are certain you have been here before. This is déjà vu, the eerie sensation of reliving a moment that is, by every measure, happening for the first time. Neuroscience offers explanations. Some researchers suggest that déjà vu arises from a brief misfiring in the brain's memory systems, where new experiences are accidentally processed as though they were familiar. Others think it comes from the brain comparing the present moment to similar past experiences and creating a false sense of repetition. Temporal lobe activity, subtle glitches in attention, even the timing of how the hemispheres of the brain communicate, all have been proposed as causes. But science, for all its precision, cannot erase the feeling itself. Déjà vu does not arrive like a clinical error. It arrives like a whisper from outside the present, a tug on the fabric of time itself. For an instant, the moment feels layered, as if another version of you has stood here before, in another cycle of existence, and the memory of that echo has slipped through. Across cultures, people have interpreted déjà vu as more than a neurological quirk. In some traditions, it is taken as evidence of reincarnation, glimpses of lives lived before, bleeding into the present. In others, it is seen as a sign of fate, a reminder that certain moments are destined to recur. Even in secular thought, the sensation is difficult to dismiss. It feels too intimate, too uncanny, too much like a keyhole view into something vast and hidden. If time itself is a loop, then déjà vu could be the crack where the circle shows through. A fragment of memory carried across cycles. A fleeting recognition not of the past in this life, but of the same moment lived in countless prior returns. In this light, déjà vu is not an accident, but a clue the human mind brushing against the geometry of recurrence. Consider how ordinary déjà vu often island. It does not strike in moments of great importance, but in the mundane. Turning a corner, folding laundry, hearing someone laugh. If time loops, then of course it would. Every detail, every gesture, no matter how small, would return. The profound and the trivial alike are woven into the fabric of eternal repetition. Déjà vu may simply be the echo of that weaving. And here, speculation becomes dreamlike. Imagine that each déjà vu is a message from another self, not a stranger, but you, reaching across cycles to remind yourself, this has happened before, and it will happen again. A reminder that you are not walking forward into the unknown, but tracing a path already carved through the looping corridors of time. In this way, déjà vu becomes more than curiosity. It becomes a portal. Not proof, perhaps, but a suggestion that the universe is larger and stranger than we know, and that within its endless repetitions, we sometimes feel the faint shiver of recognition. If déjà vu is a portal, then what exactly does it open onto? Science may call it an error of memory, but speculation dares to call it something else. A glimpse into the very structure of time itself. A reminder that what feels like the present moment is not unique, but a recurrence, one iteration among countless others already lived, already faded, already waiting to return. Imagine the sensation not as a misfiring neuron, but as a fracture in the veil of linear perception. Perhaps, for a second, consciousness remembers what the body cannot, that you have stood in this place before, under the same light, hearing the same words, feeling the same air on your skin. Déjà vu becomes less an illusion and more a resonance, a brief alignment of memory across cycles, like two strings vibrating in harmony across the gulf of time. This idea resonates with ancient and modern thought alike. In Hindu philosophy, the doctrine of samsara teaches that lives repeat endlessly until liberation is achieved. In Buddhist traditions, moments of awakening are said to reveal not only the truth of the present, but the deep echo of all lives past and future. Even Western mysticism has entertained the idea that déjà vu signals the persistence of the soul across multiple incarnations, its memory breaking through the silence of rebirth. But there is another possibility, quieter and stranger, that déjà vu is not proof of reincarnation, but of repetition itself. Not the soul traveling through new bodies, but the same body, the same world, the same civilization, lived over and over, like a line in a song that the universe cannot stop humming. Each return is not new, but familiar, because it is the same, and déjà vu is the faint recognition of that truth. In this light, déjà vu becomes evidence of the looping nature of time. Just as the Poincaré recurrence theorem in mathematics suggests that given infinite time, systems will eventually return to prior states, so too might the universe compel our lives, our histories, to circle back. Déjà vu is the whisper that we are already living those returns. Consider how fleeting these sensations are. They vanish almost as soon as they appear, slipping through our fingers like smoke. Perhaps that is because to fully remember the cycle would collapse the illusion of forward motion, and the play would unravel. The loop depends on our not knowing, and so déjà vu arrives only as a trace, a hint, a soft reminder that the story has been told before. Speculatively, one could imagine that déjà vu is the universe's way of nudging us toward awareness. A gentle message: pay attention. You have walked this road before. If time is indeed a loop, then perhaps these moments are invitations to live differently, to notice what is repeating, and to ask whether it must repeat in exactly the same way. And so déjà vu, in this speculative light, becomes both evidence and opportunity. Evidence that the line of time is not as straight as it seems. Opportunity to awaken within the loop, to see the repetition not as prison but as pattern, and perhaps to meet it with greater grace. If déjà vu hints at memory crossing cycles, then prophecy is its cousin, the conviction that the future is already known, already glimpsed, already written somewhere beyond our sight. Across cultures and ages, humans have sought voices capable of piercing the veil of tomorrow. Oracles spoke in riddles at Delphi, their cryptic words interpreted by priests. Hebrew prophets thundered warnings to kings and peoples, urging them to change course before judgment arrived. Visionaries across the world, shamans, seers, mystics, claimed to dream of events yet to come, and their societies listened because sometimes those visions seemed to come true. The phenomenon of prophecy has always unsettled the linear view of time. If the future has not yet happened, how could anyone know it? Yet stories of accurate predictions abound, from the oracle who warned Croesus against war with Persia, to the Mayan priests who tracked celestial cycles so precisely that they could forecast eclipses and seasonal shifts. In Norse sagas, the seers foretold Ragnarok, the twilight of the gods, not as a possibility but as an inevitability. In every case, prophecy suggests a future that already exists, waiting to be seen, rather than created moment by moment. Visionary experience often carries the same uncanny quality as déjà vu, the feeling of recognition, of inevitability. A dream that plays out the next day, a warning that proves eerily accurate. Even today, people recount premonitions, small flashes of awareness that something will happen, followed by the uncanny realization that it has. Science may call them coincidences or the result of subconscious pattern recognition. Yet for those who experience them, they feel like windows, brief and fragile, opening onto a future already set. What unites these traditions and experiences is the idea that time does not unfold strictly forward. If prophecy is possible, even in fragmentary form, then the future is not sealed off from the present, it bleeds into it. The loop of time might allow knowledge to slip backward, just as memory slips forward. What we call prophecy may be nothing more than a mind catching the echo of a cycle it has already lived, remembering not the past but the next repetition of the same story. In this light, prophecy and prediction become more than superstition. They become evidence that the future, like the past, may already be inscribed in the looping pattern of time. An oracle's riddle, a prophet's warning, a visionary's dream, all may be fragments of memory carried across cycles, surfacing when the conditions align. Speculatively, if time is a loop, then prophecy is not miraculous but inevitable. Just as déjà vu reminds us of where we have been, prophecy reminds us of where we are going, because where we are going is also where we have already been. If prophecy is not foresight but recollection, then the entire relationship we have with the future begins to shift. What we call prediction may instead be memory, surfacing from the last turning of the wheel. In a looping universe, tomorrow is not unwritten, it is archived. The future is not a blank page waiting for our choices to inscribe it, but a text already drafted, its lines familiar even if we have forgotten the words. Consider how natural memory works. Sometimes it is sharp, a vivid replay of sights and sounds. Other times it is faint, no more than a feeling, an atmosphere, a tug of familiarity. What if the future operates the same way? Prophets, oracles, visionaries, those who claim to see ahead may not be glimpsing a new landscape at all. They may be recalling the faint outlines of a place already visited, already walked, already lived in the last cycle of time. This reimagines prophecy as an act of remembering rather than foretelling. When the oracle at Delphi spoke in riddles, perhaps the ambiguity came not from divine obscurity, but from the fuzziness of memory itself. When a dream eerily matches an event the next day, perhaps it is because both are iterations of a scene replayed across countless cycles. When myths describe endings and rebirths with uncanny confidence, perhaps they are not only stories but half-remembered reports from a humanity that has walked the loop before. Such an idea softens the boundary between past and future. If time repeats, then every event exists twice, once as memory, once as destiny. The sensation of déjà vu would be the personal echo of this truth, while prophecy would be the collective echo, surfacing in culture as myths, warnings, or visions. Both arise from the same source, the looping of time itself. It is worth noting how often prophecy is tied to cycles. The Hindu yugas describe vast ages that end and begin again. The Mayan calendar turns in great wheels, each cycle marked by transformation. Norse seers envisioned Ragnarok not as an absolute end but as the destruction and renewal of the cosmos. All of these frame the future not as novelty but as return. If time loops, then of course the future would be remembered because it has already been lived. From this perspective, the unease we feel about prophecy may be misplaced. Instead of fearing predestination, we might understand that the loop does not rob us of meaning but deepens it. To live is to walk a path both known and forgotten, to enact a play both rehearsed and improvised. The lines may be familiar, but the way we deliver them, the pauses, the emphasis, the care or cruelty with which we act is always ours. Speculatively, then, the future is not something we approach for the first time, but something we revisit. We are not explorers of uncharted territory, but travelers returning to landscapes our souls dimly recall. To dream of the future may be to dream of memory, surfacing not from what lies ahead, but from what lies behind, folded back upon itself. In this light, the greatest prophecies may not be warnings at all, but reminders urging us to recognize that we have been here before, and to live this repetition with greater awareness, greater care than the last. If prophecy suggests the future is already written, quantum physics takes the idea one step further, hinting that the future may not only exist already but may also shape the present. In the strange theater of the quantum world, cause and effect are not as rigid as we once imagined. The arrow of time, so clear in daily life, begins to bend, blur, and sometimes reverse. One of the most provocative concepts in this field is retrocausality, the idea that an effect can precede its cause, that choices made in the present might ripple backward to influence the past. At first glance, this seems impossible. Yet experiments in quantum mechanics continue to leave the door open. Consider Wheeler's delayed choice experiment, first proposed by physicist John Archibald Wheeler in the 1970s and tested in various forms since. The experiment involves light, the most fundamental traveler of time. When photons are sent toward a double-slit apparatus, they behave as either particles or waves depending on whether the observer chooses to measure them. But in Wheeler's version, the decision of how to measure is delayed, made after the photon has already entered the experiment. Astonishingly, the results suggest that the photon behaves as if it knew what would be asked of it in the future, altering its past behavior accordingly. This implication unsettles the very foundation of causality. If the present can change the past, then perhaps time is not a one-way street at all. Perhaps it is more like a looped fabric, where threads of cause and effect weave in both directions. Events may ripple forward, yes, but they may also ripple back, shaping the very conditions from which they arose. Retrocausality has led some physicists to speculate that time may be self-consistent, that the universe arranges itself to prevent paradox, looping events into coherence rather than chaos. If this is true, then the sense of inevitability we feel in prophecy or déjà vu may be rooted not only in myth or memory but in the deep structure of reality itself. The future is not merely a possibility, it is a participant in shaping the present. Speculatively, this paints a strange picture of history. Civilizations may rise not only because of past conditions but because of future necessities. Our actions today may be influenced subtly by the echoes of choices we have not yet made. In such a universe, time is not a line but a circle or perhaps a spiral, where past and future continually fold into one another, each shaping the other in an endless dance. This vision resonates with the looping myths of humanity, but now with equations and experiments whispering the same tune. If the cosmos itself operates with retroactive causality, then perhaps every moment, past, present, and future, is part of a single, closed loop, endlessly self-sustaining. Let the room grow quiet for a moment and imagine time not as a straight corridor with doors only on one side, but as a gallery whose hallway curves back into itself. You walk, and without quite noticing, you pass the same painting again, only now it is lit differently, and you see details you missed before. In such a gallery, you can circle forever without colliding with contradiction, provided the lamps and frames are hung with care. This is the spirit of self-consistency. Time may bend, braid, even fold, yet it refuses to tear. Events return to complete themselves. Causes and effects knit together into a seamless fabric with no loose threads to snag on paradox. Physicists have given this intuition a formal edge. The Novikov self-consistency principle states, simply and sternly, that only those histories occur whose local details remain globally consistent. If a loop of time exists, say, through a wormhole or a world line that curves back, the events along that loop must conspire to avoid contradiction. You may meet your younger self, you may even influence them, but you will influence them only in ways that preserve the very future from which you came. The universe, in this picture, is not a chaos of possibilities. It is a choreography that forbids steps that would trip the dance. This idea first becomes vivid when you test it with a paradox. Suppose, in a classic thought experiment, you build a time machine and travel back to damage the device that will one day enable your journey. If you succeed too well, you prevent your own departure. If you prevent your departure, you cannot arrive to cause the damage. The loop breaks. Novikov's answer is to remove the "too" from "succeed too well." You might dent the casing, jostle a component, introduce a delay or fail in ways that alter nothing essential. Consistency acts like a set of rails beneath your choices. You have room to move, room to wobble and wander. You do not have license to derail. A famous example makes the point with billiard balls. Imagine a wormhole that sends a ball back into its own past to collide with its younger version on the pool table. The naive paradox is obvious. What if the older ball strikes the younger at just the right angle to prevent it from entering the wormhole in the first place? But when you calculate the trajectories, something subtler emerges. There is a narrow family of strikes in which the older ball nudges does not prohibit the younger one into the mouth of the wormhole at exactly the needed angle. The collision is not a contradiction, it is the very cause that ensures its own possibility. The loop closes like a clasp. This is not magic, it is a statement about constraints. In physics, we often think in terms of initial conditions. Specify the state at the beginning, let the equations run, and the future unfolds. Self-consistency adds a second boundary. The future must meet the past without tearing. The history that actually occurs is the one that satisfies both constraints at once. If you like metaphors, trade script for score, and think in terms of the principle of least action, of all the imaginable paths a system could take. Reality selects the one that makes the whole route cohere, beginning to end. In a looping universe, beginning and end shake hands. The path that exists is the path that fits both grips. quantum theory, with its eerie flexibility about order, supplies additional ways to picture this. One approach, a cousin of the two-state vector or two-time boundary formalisms, imagines that events are influenced by boundary conditions set at both the past and the future. Another, associated with path integrals, speaks of reality as a kind of grand sum over all possible histories, with the observed world emerging where the paths reinforce one another without contradiction. In both stories, what is becomes what can be remembered from both directions at once. Where contradiction would arise, the contribution cancels; where coherence reigns, it sings. Even in the classical imagination, there were hints of such reciprocity. The Wheeler-Feynman absorber theory of electromagnetism flirted with the notion that radiation involves both retarded waves, influences that move forward in time, and advanced waves, influences that move backward, with the universe as a whole enforcing a consistent handshake. Whether or not such models survive every test, their mood is instructive. They teach us to picture time as a web that tightens wherever a loose knot would have formed. All of this may sound abstract until you translate it into experience and narrative. Consider the bootstrap paradox, a perennial favorite of storytellers, a violin sonata with no composer, a blueprint with no inventor, a book with no author, an object or piece of information that seems to loop through time without origin. Within self-consistency, this is not a bug, it is a permissible loop. The score exists because it existed before, the loop is its cradle. There is something unsettling here. Yes, our intuition loves linear provenance, but the loop's authority is the absence of contradiction. In a world that values coherence over origin, being well-fitted replaces being first. Self-consistency does more than protect logic, it protects continuity. If the timeline were fragile and easily shattered, the mere hint of retrocausality would end in ruin. But a universe that enforces coherence becomes strangely hospitable to loops. You can allow influences to curl backward without fear that they will tear the fabric. The fabric thickens where stress might have split it. The result is a cosmos in which time travel, retrocausal correlations, and delayed choices can, in principle, coexist with sanity, because the only histories that ever get to live are the histories that already agree with themselves. Now widen the lens. If loops may exist at the level of particles or clever thought experiments, what happens when we extend the principle to the scale of history? Here, the speculative thread of our documentary tightens. Suppose the universe keeps itself paradox-free not only in laboratories but across the long theatre of civilizations. Suppose that the broad arcs we keep seeing, formation, expansion, overreach, correction, renewal, are not merely psychological patterns, but consistency conditions on a time loop that includes us. Wars end because perpetual escalation would break the loop. Empires fall because infinite growth in finite systems would contradict boundary conditions. Recoveries arrive because permanent freeze would foreclose the very future that anchors the past. In such a world, certain milestones become fixed points, events, or structures that recur because the loop requires them. Fire harnessed, writing abstracted, law codified, agriculture intensified, cities layered, energy scaled, networks spun, debt cycled, reform rehearsed. The timing and texture vary by cycle. The existence of the milestones does not. You can think of them as attractors in the phase space of a civilization. Positions the system will settle into again and again while still allowing an infinite variety of paths among them. At the personal scale, births and bonds, grief and grace, the long apprenticeship to meaning, these two act like fixed points around which life can improvise without contradiction. This idea unsettles our favorite story about freedom, so it deserves care. Self-consistency does not mean you are a puppet. It means your choices must be compatible with the whole. You still speak your lines. You are not free to utter a sentence that deletes the play. In fact, within a loop, responsibility becomes sharper. If the only histories that survive are the ones that fit, then it matters that you learn to fit with care, to make promises that can be kept without violence to the fabric, to design systems that can absorb shocks without demanding paradoxical rescues later, to choose ambitions that do not require the future to contradict the past to save them. Think of it like navigation on a sea that returns to itself. There are currents you cannot cancel, reefs you cannot deny, winds you must respect. Within those constraints, seamanship is real. A captain cannot command the water to run uphill, but can lay a course that brings the crew home with sails intact. Self-consistency is the chart. Agency is the hand on the tiller. What changes in a looping ocean is not whether you can act, it is how you judge your acts, by their harmony with the whole, not by their novelty alone. It helps to bring the metaphor closer to the mechanics of daily life. Consider maintenance, the unglamorous art of keeping things working. In linear time, maintenance can feel like a tax on progress. You fix what the march of innovation breaks and push on. In a self-consistent loop, neglecting maintenance courts contradiction. Deferred repairs grow into emergencies that require miracles. Miracles are just contradictions in costume. The consistent loop disfavors the miraculous and rewards the steady. Bridges inspected on schedule, levees kept honest, archives backed up in more than one format, laws refreshed so they can carry new loads without snapping. Coherence, at human scale, looks like care, or take information. Rumor and rage burn hot. Institutions that transmit truth require patience. In a looped world, truth that cannot survive a cycle was never truth. Distortion that cannot be mended in one turn will return sharpened in the next. Self-consistency encourages designs that dampen noise by distributing trust across time. Records stored redundantly, methods taught as craft, rituals that renew norms before they crack. Where paradox is forbidden, brittle narratives fail, those with self-correcting joints endure. There is a moral resonance here that suits the hush of a night's listen. If the universe forbids contradictions, then cruelty, so often a demand that the world be what it cannot be, runs against the grain. Endlessly extracting from soils as if they do not tire, building on floodplains as if rivers do not remember their beds, loading the atmosphere as if it has no chemistry, treating people as if they will not react with the physics of psyches and pain. These are contradictions that a loop will not sustain. The correction may be slow, the bill may arrive in a different era than the spree, but the loop collects. Quietly, relentlessly, it collects. Self-consistency also gives a new angle on memory and myth. Stories that persist across ages often look suspiciously like devices the loop uses to keep itself whole. Flood myths that warn against forgetting floodplains, seasonal festivals that fix agricultural timing in song, laws that ritualize restraint, taboos that encode ecological limits. These are not superstitions so much as boundary markers. They help each cycle pick a path that does not demand impossible rescues later. The story survives because it fits. It fits because it helps the next turn avoid contradiction. What of the places where we feel the loop most intimately? Déjà vu, foreshadowing dreams, the odd taste of inevitability at the hinge of a decision. Neuroscience has plenty to say about misfires and memory. A self-consistent cosmos adds a different nuance. Perhaps consciousness sometimes catches the faintest echo of the boundary conditions ahead. The way a sailor reads a wind shift before it arrives. Not prophecy in thunder, but a pressure on the skin that says, "Trim the sail now." You might wonder whether this vision leaves any room for the new. If the loop demands coherence, can anything truly surprise? The answer is in the difference between pattern and performance. Jazz standards can be played forever. Each rendition still finds phrases no horn has tried. A sonnet's meter is fixed. The lines astonish anyway. A river follows its bed. No two ripples are the same. Self-consistency fixes the key and tempo so the piece stays whole. Within those, invention is not only possible, it is where meaning lives. Consider, too, the gentlest politics of a paradox-free time: preventative mercy. If certain pressures always accumulate, it is wise to bleed them before they burst. If certain margins always thin, it is wise to thicken them before they tear. In the loop, courage looks less like crisis heroics and more like early, ordinary kindness. You seed future coherence every time you practice fairness now, because the loop ensures that unfairness returns with interest. You seed resilience every time you build redundancy, because the loop ensures that single points of failure sooner or later fail. You seed peace every time you design for dissent, because the loop ensures that silenced voices find louder ways to speak. At the cosmological edge of this meditation, self-consistency becomes nearly theological, a law of the universe that has the flavor of wisdom. It does not bark commandments, it enforces compatibility. It does not assign guilt, it balances ledgers. It does not promise that pain can be eliminated, it promises that contradictions cannot be sustained. The return to coherence is not always gentle, but it is inevitable. In that inevitability there is a hard, consoling fairness. Whatever is borrowed against the fabric must be repaid. Whatever is given to the fabric remains. Bring the scale back down to a room with a single lamp. What does it mean, practically, to live as if time were self-consistent? It means you make promises you can keep without special pleading. You practice habits that do not rely on exceptions. You aim for pleasures that don't demand erasures later. You build institutions that can say no to popular impossibilities. You teach children truths that will not need to be unlearned in a harsher light. You treat the world as a partner who remembers, because it does. And if you are composing a civilization, as we all are, in miniature you learn to favor architectures that are comfortable in recurrence. Neighborhoods scaled to walking so that energy shocks don't strand lives. Water systems that respect the old paths of streams so that floods are inconvenience, not catastrophe. Food webs that diversify so that a single pest cannot cancel supper. Grids that interleave large and small, central and local, so that no single spark takes out the night. Laws with built-in sunsets and renewals so that they never ossify into contradictions with the present. These are design languages that speak fluently with a world that refuses paradox. The self-consistent loop also reframes ambition. In linear time, ambition is often a race with the reaper. Do something unprecedented before the curtain falls. In a loop, ambition matures into craft. Do something worthy of repetition. Something that can be carried without cruelty from one turn to the next. This does not reduce the horizon, it refines it. A poem that still matters when fashions change, a bridge that still stands when the maps are redrawn, a practice of hospitality that does not exhaust the host. These are ambitions built for a world that remembers. Perhaps the quietest shift is in how we hold regret. If the loop forbids paradox, then the past you wish to revoke is part of the structure that allowed you to arrive here with the awareness that can act now. Regret does not need to vanish. It needs to be spent, turned into repair, apology, altered habit, and better thresholds for those who will cross after you. Self-consistency will not let you unsay what was said, but it will gladly accept an added line that sets the rhyme straight. Listen, finally, to the tone of such a universe. It is not cruel, it is not sentimental, it is exacting and, in a strange way, kind. It will not indulge fantasies that the bill won't come due. It will not let a kindness disappear. It has no patience for impossible bargains. It keeps immaculate books on small generosities. It does not erase, it integrates. The loop is not a jail, it is a commitment to coherence. Within that commitment, you can be brave without being reckless, restrained without being timid, imaginative without being contradictory. And if there is a last image to hold as you drift, picture a clock whose hands do not circle emptily but trace a figure that closes perfectly with each turn. The face does not change, yet the light on the brass shifts, and new reflections appear in the glass. You can stand in front of this clock for a lifetime and never see the same gleam twice. The minute hand completes itself not because it is trapped, but because completion is beautiful. Self-consistency is that beauty at the scale of time. It is the universe's refusal to let the story tear its insistence that the ending find the beginning without violence, and that every passage fit the whole. If the universe is a loop, endlessly circling back upon itself, then the question of free will becomes inescapable. Do we truly choose, or are we actors following lines already rehearsed across infinite cycles? Each word spoken, each glance exchanged, each decision made are these fresh creations of the moment, or echoes reverberating from lives already lived, destined to be lived again. Daily life seems to promise freedom. You wake, you dress, you decide whether to linger with your thoughts or rush into the day. You choose between the familiar cup of coffee or the rare indulgence of tea. You walk down streets lined with possibility. Yet if time itself bends back, these motions may not be choices at all, but necessities, a script hidden in the geometry of the cosmos. The philosopher's thought experiment of determinism suddenly becomes the physicist's equation, suggesting that what feels spontaneous may already be written into the loop. The Novikov self-consistency principle offers a haunting illustration. It insists that paradox is impossible, that the past cannot be changed in any way that would disrupt the present. Even if you were to travel backward through time, you could not erase yourself, for you already exist within the loop. Every attempt to alter the script would instead fulfill it. In this light, every so-called choice is less about invention and more about alignment. You cannot act otherwise, because you already did not. And yet the feeling of freedom persists. To hesitate before a door and then decide to open it feels like autonomy. To speak kindness when cruelty would have been easier feels like a decision. Civilizations, too, embody this paradox. When a people reforms, revolts, or builds a monument that shapes their age, the sense of agency is undeniable. Perhaps this is the essence of living within a loop, to feel freedom inside the cage of necessity, to move as though we are unbound even when the path is already traced. Philosophers have suggested that this does not rob life of meaning. Instead, it alters its weight. If time is a loop, then the significance of action lies not in novelty, but in recurrence. To forgive once may be forgotten. To forgive across infinite cycles is to weave forgiveness into the very fabric of reality. Free will, then, may not be about crafting something new, but about embodying something eternal. History reflects this truth with almost musical clarity. The Roman Empire rose, fell, and echoed through Byzantium, through Renaissance humanism, through the very architecture of modern governance. Dynasties in China expanded and contracted in waves, repeating patterns of order and collapse. Even in economics, booms and busts follow arcs so familiar they could be mistaken for choreography. Each era feels unique to those who live it, yet in the perspective of recurrence, each is a verse sung again. Freedom lies not in escaping the refrain, but in the inflections, the harmonies, the ways we sing the song when our turn comes. Speculatively, this transforms how we might see ourselves. The first spark of fire, the first etched symbols on clay, the first machines rising from human ingenuity. Perhaps these were not accidents of culture, but inevitabilities of the loop. Each discovery, each collapse, each revolution is not random but structural, demanded by the recurrence of time itself. We live them as choices because we must, because the play requires actors who believe the stage is theirs to shape. And yet there is comfort in this vision. If every act is destined to recur, then no act is ever wasted. The art you create, the hand you hold, the struggle you endure, all are preserved, repeated, lived again in cycles beyond counting. Free will may be an illusion, but it is an illusion that dignifies our existence. It allows us to inhabit the eternal not as prisoners but as participants, feeling each moment as though it were new, even as it repeats. So when the question arises, do your choices matter if time is a loop? The answer may be both humbling and profound. They matter because you live them. They matter because you feel them. They matter because eternity is not a barren repetition, but a garden in which each moment blooms forever, fragrant with the illusion of freedom, rooted in the soil of destiny, flowering again and again across the endless wheel of time. If eternity is a garden where every moment blooms again and again, then the true burden is not in the act itself, but in its recurrence. For to live once is to taste the sweetness or bitterness of a single season. To live eternally within the loop is to carry the knowledge that every joy and every sorrow will come not once, but endlessly. This is the weight of repetition, the awareness that nothing is final, that every act echoes forever. Consider joy, the laughter of a child, the first warmth of sunrise, the stillness of a night where you feel at peace. These moments may return. Not once, but 1,000 times, each as vivid as the last. In repetition, joy becomes a kind of immortality. Nothing is ever truly lost, for the wheel brings it back to you. The beauty of a fleeting instant becomes eternal, held not by memory alone but by recurrence itself. But what of suffering? The argument, the grief, the loneliness that pierces the heart if time is a loop, then so too do these return. The same pain endured again and again, until it is indistinguishable from fate. This is the shadow side of eternal recurrence, the thought that even anguish may be eternal, endlessly replayed on the stage of time. And here lies the paradox. If all returns, then the only true difference between cycles is not in the events themselves, but in our awareness of them. Perhaps the loop is fixed, but consciousness shifts. A moment of anger lived once may return as a moment of compassion lived differently, not because the script changes, but because awareness deepens. In this sense, awareness itself becomes the only freedom, the only newness permitted within the repetition. Speculatively, this may be the great secret hidden in both myth and philosophy. The Hindu yugas, Nietzsche's eternal recurrence, the physics of self-consistent time all converge on a similar whisper: that life is not escaped but embraced. The loop is not meant to be broken but to be known. And once known, it is transformed from burden to meaning. Civilizations too feel this weight. The rise and fall of Rome, the dynastic cycles of China, the endless rhythm of boom and collapse in human economies, these are not accidents, but inevitabilities. Yet how each civilization understands its cycle changes. Some see collapse as tragedy. Others see it as purification, renewal, a return to harmony. The events repeat, but the awareness reframes them. In this way, humanity evolves not through escaping the loop, but through interpreting it differently each time. For the individual, this weight can become either despair or liberation. To imagine living every mistake forever may seem unbearable. But to imagine living every beauty forever, every sunrise, every embrace, every song is to glimpse eternity not as punishment but as gift. Perhaps the loop asks us to choose our perspective, to decide whether repetition is curse or blessing. And so, the weight of repetition is not only the heaviness of knowing all will return, it is also the invitation to meet that return with grace. To live each cycle as though awareness itself were the seed that changes the garden. For if everything must bloom again, then perhaps the meaning lies not in the bloom, but in the way we learn to see it, again and again, with new eyes. Across the world, myths speak of civilizations lost to water, Atlantis swallowed by the sea, Lemuria vanishing beneath the waves, Sumerian and biblical floods washing away humanity to begin anew. These stories are not isolated curiosities, but recurring archetypes. Cultures separated by oceans and millennia tell strikingly similar tales, of golden ages shattered, of floods that erased all but a few survivors, of knowledge carried forward like a fragile ember through the darkness. Perhaps these myths are simply metaphors, symbolic expressions of nature's power. Floods were real. After all, rivers burst their banks, coastlines shifted, storms consumed entire villages. But when we hear of civilizations so advanced that their ruins disappeared without a trace, when we hear of gods or heroes preserving fragments of wisdom after cataclysm, we step into deeper waters. We are no longer speaking only of storms, but of cycles, echoes of earlier ages lost in time's looping current. Take Atlantis. Plato described it not merely as a city, but as an empire, vast, wealthy, technologically advanced, undone by its own arrogance and drowned in a single day and night of misfortune. Whether he intended allegory or memory, the tale has endured for thousands of years. Why? Because it resonates with something buried in human imagination, the suspicion that we are not the first to build, not the first to fall. The Mayan calendar, with its great cycles of creation and destruction, whispers the same truth. Worlds rise and vanish, not once, but many times. Hindu cosmology speaks of yugas, ages that end in dissolution before beginning anew. Norse mythology tells of Ragnarök, a fiery flood of destruction followed by the rebirth of gods and men. These are not stories of linear time, but of return, of civilizations repeating their arcs again and again. Speculatively, such myths may carry more than poetic symbolism. They may preserve echoes of earlier cycles of Earth's history, fragments of memory carried across ages. If civilizations have risen and fallen before, their traces may have been erased by geology, their monuments swallowed by oceans, their knowledge reduced to whispers of culture bringers and sky kings. What remains is not stone or steel, but story myth as the fossil of memory. And here, the flood becomes more than catastrophe. It becomes the mechanism of reset. The waters wash away the old to prepare the world for the new. Survivors emerge carrying fragments of what was lost: fire, language, agriculture, law. They become gods in memory, teachers in legend, their survival woven into myths of Prometheus, Quetzalcoatl, or Thoth. The civilization before them is forgotten, but its echo is remembered through them. From this perspective, Atlantis is not unique but archetypal. It is the name given to a universal pattern, the rise of a great civilization, its hubris or fate leading to destruction, its memory lingering as a cautionary tale. Whether it happened once or countless times across loops of time may not matter. The pattern itself is the lesson, endlessly replayed. So, when we hear of drowned worlds, sunken kingdoms, or forgotten ages, we may be hearing more than myth. We may be hearing the memory of cycles, the echo of civilizations erased by the rhythm of Earth, folded back into the loop of time. The waters rise, the world begins again, and in each new age, humanity inherits fragments, warnings, whispers, half-remembered dreams of what came before. If civilizations can vanish and rise again, carried forward through echoes and fragments, then what of us, the individual souls who walk within them? Just as cultures tell stories of floods and rebirths, many of the world's spiritual traditions whisper of another kind of cycle, the soul itself returning, life after life, caught in its own eternal recurrence. The idea of reincarnation appears across cultures too distant to have easily influenced one another. In Hinduism and Buddhism, the soul is said to pass through countless lives shaped by karma until liberation is found. In certain strands of ancient Greek thought, from Pythagoras to Plato, the soul was seen as immortal, condemned to return in different bodies until it learned the necessary lessons. Even among the Celts and some indigenous peoples, stories persist of spirits that return again, recognizable not in body but in essence, a familiar spark, a remembered gaze, an echo of something already lived. At its heart, reincarnation is another expression of time as a loop. The body dies, but the soul does not vanish. It circles back, finding a new form, a new story, a new role in the endless play. And like civilizations, the self may not always remember its earlier cycles. Just as myths are fragments of forgotten ages, so too are our intuitions, dreams, and déjà vu perhaps fragments of forgotten selves. Speculatively, if the universe is built on recurrence, then reincarnation may not be mystical metaphor but natural law. Just as energy is never destroyed but only transformed, perhaps consciousness too cannot disappear. Instead, it returns not always with memory intact, but with patterns, inclinations, and lessons carried forward like faint scars or blessings from lifetimes before. Consider how this echoes the cycles of civilizations. Just as empires rise, fall, and rise again, souls too may experience their own rises and falls. Times of abundance and joy, times of trial and collapse, times of quiet rebirth. In each cycle, awareness deepens, not because the events are new, but because the soul learns to see them differently. Reincarnation myths also carry a moral dimension. If time loops endlessly, then the weight of our choices becomes heavier, not lighter. Every kindness, every cruelty, every act of care or neglect is not a single event lost to the past. It is a seed that will bloom again, in this life or another, carried forward across the loop. Karma, in this sense, is not punishment but continuity, the echo of action meeting us in the next return. From this perspective, the soul's looping journey mirrors the looping journey of history. Civilizations may forget, but humanity remembers in myth. Individuals may forget, but the soul remembers in pattern. The stories of culture bringers, of floods and fires, of rebirth and renewal are reflected in the intimate stories of our own selves, reborn and reshaped by cycles too vast to see in a single lifetime. And so, when myths speak of reincarnation, perhaps they are not imagining but remembering. Perhaps the cycle of the soul is simply another verse in the greater song of time, one more echo of a universe that refuses to let anything vanish, that bends every ending back into a beginning. If reincarnation is the soul's echo in the wheel of time, then karma may be the rhythm that governs its return. Across traditions, karma is described as the law of cause and effect. Every action carries a consequence, every deed leaves an imprint. But when placed within the framework of eternal recurrence, karma becomes more than a moral law. It becomes the cosmic reset, the mechanism by which the universe maintains balance across its endless loops. Imagine time as a great cycle spinning endlessly, civilizations rising and falling, souls entering and leaving bodies, stars igniting and collapsing. Without balance, the wheel would falter, spinning out of harmony, grinding itself into chaos. Karma, in this vision, is the adjustment, the hidden hand that ensures the loop continues seamlessly. Every cruelty met with its echo, every kindness woven into the future, every imbalance corrected not as judgment, but as equilibrium. In Hindu and Buddhist thought, karma operates across lifetimes, binding the soul to cycles of rebirth until liberation is achieved. The wheel of samsara is not random but regulated. What we do returns, shaping what we must face next. Seen through the lens of looping universes, this principle extends even further. Perhaps karma is not only personal, but civilizational, even cosmic. Entire cultures may carry the weight of their choices, rising or falling as echoes of deeds too vast for individuals to bear. Perhaps planets, even universes, have their karmic arcs, each collapse and rebirth a balancing of the scales written into the laws of reality. Speculatively, karma may explain why myths across cultures tell of floods, fires, and cosmic resets. When imbalance grows too great, when hubris overwhelms humility, when greed eclipses care, the universe restores balance not by punishment, but by return. The floodwaters rise, civilizations dissolve, souls are reborn, and the loop begins again. This is not destruction but correction, the wheel of karma ensuring that the story continues, cleansed of its excesses, ready for a new turn. Even in modern terms, we can see reflections of this principle. Climate change, economic collapse, social upheaval, These may be read as karmic responses, the consequences of actions rippling back upon those who set them in motion. Whether or not we frame it in mystical terms, the pattern remains. Imbalance demands reset, and the reset comes whether we invite it or not. For the soul, karma means no act is wasted. A kindness offered to a stranger may ripple through lifetimes. A cruelty inflicted may return generations later. Nothing disappears, everything circles back. For civilizations, karma means no empire is eternal. The arrogance of power eventually topples into humility, the excesses of wealth into collapse, and for the cosmos itself, karma may mean no age lasts forever. Each expansion meets its contraction, each big bang its big crunch or bounce, each universe giving birth to another in endless balance. In this way, karma becomes the great equalizer of eternity. It transforms recurrence from meaningless repetition into a teaching cycle, ensuring that no lesson can ever be skipped, no imbalance left unaddressed. Civilizations may forget, souls may resist, but the universe remembers, quietly, patiently, returning each story until its balance is restored. And so, karma may be more than morality. It may be the very architecture of looping time, the hidden law that bends endings back into beginnings, not to punish, but to reset. The wheel turns, balance is restored, and the story begins again, cleansed and renewed, echoing through the infinite cycles of Earth's history and beyond. Across cultures, one truth echoes again and again: death is not the final curtain, but a threshold. In the myths of reincarnation, in the dreams of eternal return, in the physics of recurrence and the rhythms of karma, we hear the same refrain that nothing vanishes. Life does not fall into silence, it circles back, woven into the endless fabric of time. This vision humbles and unsettles, for if nothing is truly lost, then perhaps even death is not escape but return. When the body falls away, do we dissolve into nothingness? Or do we step once more onto a familiar stage, into the loop of civilizations and souls that has been turning since the dawn of existence? Do we vanish into void, or do we go back to the oldest civilization of all, the one that has always been waiting for us within the wheel? And if that is so, then death is not a door closing but a gate opening, not into silence but into sound, not into absence but into memory. Behind it lie voices ancient, countless, patient, the voices of those who have walked this path before, who have fallen and risen in cycles too vast to name. They are waiting, not to judge, but to welcome. So as you drift into rest, imagine this: a darkness not of ending, but of beginning, gates opening in the infinite night, and beyond them, a chorus, the remembered, the forgotten, the eternal rising to greet you, to fold you back into the song that never ends. Not gone, not lost, only returned, once more to the home where time itself begins again.